like to welcome you to the Donnie Glover Show. I'd like to welcome you to BeMoreNews.com, the news before the news, where we uncover the truth.
And absent, we need God. Only God can bring us out of this mess.
Wonderfully made. I may not look like you and you me, but that's the way it's supposed to be. Dare to be you, dare to be me, and dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, and dare to be.
Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Maryland. Lieutenant Governor George. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing fine. You hear me okay?
Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
Good.
So I've been pretty well groomed by your staff. Your staff is pretty tenacious. Donnie, stay focused. 7.5 years. How's it feel?
It feels like 7.5 years. Actually, no. It's when you look back, it went by quickly. So sometimes it's kind of hard to put dates and times around things because everything seems like yesterday.
Mm-hmm. You know, everybody wanted you to run for governor.
Yeah, a lot of people did, but the family didn't. And it really made me think about what's important to me. And so I'm happy with the decision not to run.
The pandemic has taught me the same thing. Family is everything. At the end of the day, your children, that's everything.
It helped put things in perspective. You know, what's important to you, benefiting from the life that you have and what's ahead and focusing on those things and not getting so caught up in oneself. It's thinking in terms of, the future and making sure that you enjoy the ride. Life is not long. It's, and as we get older, you realize how short it is.
You did a lot in those 7.5 years for small businesses, particularly Black businesses.
Well, we try to do the best I can. And, the businesses that are in the communities that look a lot like the communities are more likely to hire people that look like them, to give people a chance, particularly some of the younger folks that need that first job. And so I think it's important that we support small business, particularly small Black-owned businesses, minority businesses, businesses that have struggled for many years, and making sure that the next generation understands that they can do it too. They don't have to just work for somebody else, but if they have the spirit, the gumption, the drive, they can find a product or service that the community wants and that the larger community wants. They can be their own boss, but it does require hard work, and no one's going to give you anything.
Was it easy to beat the Democrats 7.5 years ago?
I don't want to say it was easy, but the benefit we had is I give a lot of credit to Governor Hogan in terms of having a real understanding and a finger on the pulse of the electorate, that while a lot of us, myself, others, knew there was discontent in Maryland 7 years ago, 8 years ago, with the governor and the way government was run in the state, we were just upset or disappointed. And I think the difference was that Larry had his finger on the pulse in terms of how disappointed, how upset, and how much people wanted a change in Maryland. And we were able to put our campaign around that and strike a chord where the other guy did not take us seriously. And then when he did, it was way too late.
The Democrats told me to vote for that other guy.
Of course they
And
did.
my challenge is I haven't seen him since.
Mhm. Well, he's a congressman, but he's down in Prince George's County now. So.
Not
Oh, you're talking about 4
Lieutenant.
years or 3 years ago?
Yeah, Ben Jealous.
Oh yeah, no, he was what they used to say a carpetbagger. He just he flew in and then afterwards said he was going to still be around. And you're right, he hasn't. Now he popped up recently endorsing one of the candidates, which I don't know if that benefited that candidate or not.
So when I see the Maryland Democratic Party pushing a person who seemingly doesn't live here, and they tell me to vote for him, there were signs all up and down Liberty Road, particularly with Anthony Brown, that said, vote for the Democrats.
Right. All illegal signs, all illegal signs, I point out. The city didn't enforce that. I'm quite sure if we had put our signs there, they would have been taking them down. But, it's illegal to put your signs in, a median or on city property. It's supposed to be on public or private property, not on public property. So I'm quite sure if you had seen Hogan signs up and down that Liberty Road, they would have been yanked up by, the public service groups.
But I mean the messaging.
Oh, yeah. Well, and, there hasn't been a mayor, Republican mayor since 1960 in Baltimore. And so they're saying vote for the Democrats, but, the challenges that Baltimore have been under the control of the Democratic Party for the last, 60 years.
I remember you came to my community, to Sandtown, you and the governor. The governor on that particular day got on a tractor, one of those earth movers.
Oh, yeah.
Used for raising buildings right around the corner on Stricker Street.
Mm-hmm.
These were vacant buildings that we've seen for years. And you and the governor came up with Project Core. And I've seen Project Core in my old neighborhood in East Baltimore, around Patterson Park and Lambell, knocked down blocks of vacants. I saw the same thing around the corner. Invariably, someone will pose the question, because of course we have critics.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you know that, but Baltimore has its critics. And the question was, and I'll never forget it, and I didn't understand, I still don't. Why are they knocking down these buildings? And it's like, well, how long do you want to look at a vacant building?
Right.
That was one question. Why are you knocking them down? Then the other question is, what's going to replace them? Yeah.
Let's go to the second one, because I think it's pretty obvious that you have vacant buildings that were falling apart. They were in disrepair. It would cost more to try to repair them than to just take them down and start from scratch. But what Project Core was set up to do was, how many mayors ago, but at least when Stephanie Rawlings Blake was in office, and it probably started before, she had that vacancy to value program. And so she was taking down buildings, but she was doing it more and I'd say it was a strategic way where she saw, or her people were telling her there was economic development in the area, but they were taking down only a few, 1 and 2 buildings here and there. And so Project Core was to really jumpstart that. And we said, look, we're not going to just do 1 and 2 buildings. We want to, take down several buildings that the city has control of those properties. And then we would turn that property over to the city. The state wasn't going to dictate what needs to be done there. We will clear it. We will, until you make a decision what you're going to do with it, we can do some landscaping, make it open space, but then it's for the city. And when I say the city, and the governor would say the same thing, is that we're talking about the people in the city through their elected officials to say, what do we want here? Do we want this to be a park, which is what happened over there by Doc Cheatham's neighborhood? We created a park over there. Others might say, hey, we want new housing development to go in here. And so then it's up to the city to make that determination and the city residents to make that determination. The state was just saying, look, you got these derelict buildings that are a hazard, possibly falling down. A couple of years ago, we had buildings fall, and I think a young girl was killed walking to school. Another one where a guy was killed sitting in his car when a building fell on him.
I remember fire inspector. He got killed in the 700 block of East North Avenue.
Right, and then you got people going in to use drugs and do all other kinds of things and set the places on fire because they're trying to warm themselves while they're in the building. It catches on fire. So it was a clear hazard, let alone the eyesore. But in terms of what happens after the buildings come down, it is for the city to decide. And so for those who are concerned about, and I spoke to a woman not too long ago over in West Baltimore who said that she's concerned because now she sees this open space and it's like a deserted area. What's going to happen next? And I said, hey, call your council person, call the mayor's office, and say, what is the plan for this location now that it is cleared? What is the plan?
I
part
got
of a community or something.
LG.
What's that?
I have to step in. A lot of times, like in Sandtown, you can almost bet there is no plan.
Well, but and I'm not surprised. It used to be a time, I'm as you know, I'm not from Baltimore, but I've been in Baltimore a long time. In and out. And there was a time under Smokes.
We love DC, man. We love Chuck Brown.
But when Kurt Smoke was mayor, the planning department seemed to do a lot more planning in terms of what was going to happen in different communities in the city. They had a long-range plan. Somewhere along the line, it started to get pushed more towards housing and community development, city housing and community development, maybe because that's where the money is. And it was less strategic planning in terms of what's going to happen in, say, Sandtown or other neighborhoods.
And there's also people that planning that don't look like me, who don't visit here, who have a tendency not to understand the inner workings of a community. I have a meeting soon with some people from the city and the state. I saw them walking across the street and I went over there. Hey, who are you? Next thing I know, I have a meeting scheduled. But when you have challenged communities where a lot of Black people have left to move to Randallstown, is it gentrification or is it abandonment?
Well, if no one's moving in right now, it's not gentrification. It's probably abandonment. But people are going to. You don't blame people for moving. You can't blame folks for moving because everyone wants a better life for themselves and their kids. And so there's a certain point where people just give up. They lose faith in the city services. And I have to say that's why so many people. Let me tell you the big difference between Baltimore City and Prince George's County is that Prince George's County folks look at the county first for their issues. Baltimore City looks to the state first for their issues. There's just a disconnect or a lack of faith in city government amongst the city residents. They turn to the state. Now, part of it is not just the, loss of faith, but there had been so many mayors that become governor and probably look toward the city. But, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to folks in Prince George's County and they'll talk about an issue that they have and they're presenting it to the county. They've run into, they're a little concerned about getting this progressed through the county. And I'll ask them, I said, have you talked to the state at all about this particular issue? And they say, no. It really didn't occur to them to come to the state. They are going to work through the county. They have faith in the county. Whereas in Baltimore, they go to the state first. They don't even talk to their council person. They don't look to the mayor's office. And the local officials deflect everything to the state. Oh, the state's not doing enough on this, or the state's not doing enough on that. And it's like, what about you? You're the elected official. You represent that neighborhood. You represent that city. You represent that district. What are you guys doing?
Catalina
Help is
Bird
one
calls
thing.
the state of Maryland purple. She says it's purple now. It's not blue, it's not red, it's purple.
Who
Is
said
it?
that?
Catalina Bird.
Oh, Catalina. Catalina's a good woman. In some respects, it is. I would put it this way. I think the majority of people in Maryland are centrists. Some are a little left and some are a little right, but you often hear, and the Democratic elected officials in Annapolis are beholden to the far left. Further left than I think the populace really is. That's why, you had a primary opponent of Ben Jealous, who was far out of the mainstream of Marylanders, and it showed in the election. And even 4 years earlier, Anthony Brown tried to run, to appease that far left, that Tacoma Park, Montgomery County grouping of folks, and not where most of the people in Maryland are. They're in the middle. They're concerned about their kids. They're concerned about schools. They're concerned about crime. Basically kitchen table issues. They're concerned about jobs. They don't want the kids living in their basement. So those are basically bottom line kitchen table issues that most people are concerned about. And what happens, they get caught up in all these, far left, ideological battles that, the ordinary person in Maryland isn't overly concerned about, or they may be even opposed to it.
What are you most proud of?
I've gotten that question recently, and it had to make me think about it, because you do so many things, and you just try to do the best you can. There are a couple of things that of late that I look back and I'm proud of what has happened. I'm proud to see the development of the Northwood, what's going to become Northwood Commons. It was the old Northwood Shopping Center up by Morgan. I take a lot of pride in that, because I think that it wouldn't be progressing the way it is now if I didn't bring all the delegates and senators and the community associations and the ownership and Morgan into this office and sit at this table right over here. Very early in our administration.
Did that include Joan Carter Conway?
Yes, it did. And that was very early in our administration, where they were at odds, with regard to the development. Morgan and the ownership wanted to go forward. One of the community associations was totally opposed. The senator was opposed to it at the very beginning. And just bringing everybody together, and and I told them, quite frankly, just as you said, I'm from DC. I said, look, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have to be here. I don't have to pull you guys together on this. I said, but I think this development is good for the community. I think it's good for Morgan. I think it's good for the city of Baltimore. And if it's good for those three things, it's good for the state. And my responsibility is at the state level. And so that, and then there was other things that we did to make sure, through budget, through Project Core, through a number of other initiatives, to get that project going forward. So I'm very proud about that. The other has to do with a fight against that very group that I was telling you about, the far left. We had at the Board of Public Works moving a natural gas pipeline to Somerset County, Maryland. Somerset is the poorest county in the state. It is not a large population there, but they're the only county that does not have natural gas. And there's a natural gas pipeline that was being planned to go from Salisbury to, I think, to Princess Anne, but it would cover University of Maryland Eastern Shore, as well as the correctional facility, but would offer it to the local businesses and homeowners. Power in that area for the Eastern Correctional Center was through wood chips. They were trucking in wood chips, burning wood chips for heat and energy. Over at UMES, they were using propane and fuel oil. All of these are dirtier substances that require a lot of trucks on the road and more expensive power. Homeowners are using propane and fuel oil, whereas all the people that were coming in to protest against it at the Board of Public Works, which I chaired, were from Montgomery County. They were from areas where natural gas was. And I had to shame them to say, hey, all of your claims about climate change and wanting to move away from fossil fuel, you're putting it on the backs of the poorest county, which, like a lot of people don't realize, Somerset is probably minority county. It's a large Black population. I mean, it's a small population generally, but nearly 50% of that population is African American. I said, so you're putting this whole burden of climate change on the poorest folks who have not benefited from the very fuels that you benefit from every day. None of you have cut your natural gas off and decided to put a windmill in your front yard or whatever the case may be. You are still burning natural gas for your cooking, for your heating, for your air conditioning, whereas these folks are using propane, which is expensive, or fuel oil, which is expensive, and has more of a negative climate impact than natural gas. So it was shaming the treasurer and the comptroller and all of those folks who came in to get that pushed through. And so I'm very proud to be able to stand up to these folks.
Peter Franchot?
Yeah.
Not Peter Franchot.
I'm not a fan of, virtually any of those folks on the Democratic side running. So I'm not going to, overly trash one versus the other, because I think a number of them have challenges, and I'm not pleased with that grouping. So I'll leave it at that. I see you have one sponsor that I'm not pleased with him either. So
you haven't endorsed anyone yet.
No, but I will endorse Kelly Schultz. Kelly's a friend. We'll have a formal endorsement.
Why do you like her?
I've known Kelly for a long time, and I think she'll carry forward what we've been trying to do and doing over the last 7 years. I think she'll continue with that. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and I think she'll do it.
So her running mate would be the first lieutenant governor candidate in this millennium. I guess you can't. Yeah, that was 2002. So we got to get rid of 01 and 02. But he's not a black guy. He's not a black woman. This is a white Air Force pilot who claims they spent $17 million training him. I've met $1 million man. $17 million.
He's a pilot and also a doctor. So I don't know if he went to medical school through the military, that would be part of it as well. So I mean, I don't blame someone for being a pilot and going to defend, our country and keep us safe. So I don't have a problem with that.
But how will they appeal to black people?
Tell folks the truth. Tell folks the truth and not just, patronize. And some folks don't want to hear the truth, but they know it when they hear it. They may get upset, but just tell them the truth. That's it. That's how you appeal.
So what are you going to be doing now?
Well, I figure it out as time goes on. I'm looking at different things. So
you're going to write
some things
book?
I can't talk too much about or do. I can't do a whole lot in case it comes across my desk. I don't want to have conflicts of interest. But I'll be around. I'll still be around. You didn't talk about anything that I thought was on the list of what we were supposed to talk about.
Okay, what am I supposed to talk about?
You were going to talk about those Rutherford Friday, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment videos that folks need to see and, understand a little bit more about the post-Civil War amendments to the Constitution. 13th Amendment, which gave African-American men, and I point that out, the right to vote. I'm sorry, that wasn't the vote, that was the freed everyone. The 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. But the real end of slavery was December 6, 1865. It was not Juneteenth. And that's the thing that, again, patronizing that happens. Juneteenth is a big deal in Texas, and it's been a holiday in Texas for many years, many decades, quite frankly, because of the symbolism associated with Juneteenth. When Union soldiers came into Corpus Christi and let the slaves in Corpus Christi know that they had been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. But the Emancipation Proclamation did not free African Americans. African American slaves were not officially free in all territories and states until 1865 and the ratification of the 13th Amendment. So it sounds good to talk about Juneteenth because culturally it was something that, particularly in Texas and some other places, is celebrated. We have Juneteenth celebrations here, but we should make sure that people understand that it wasn't until the 13th Amendment that you were free. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves that were in states that were in rebellion. States like Maryland and Delaware, who had slaves, Kentucky and Missouri that had slaves but were not in rebellion, the slaves were continuing until either the 13th Amendment or in the case of Maryland actually outlawed slavery in 1864. They outlawed slavery here almost 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that it was done. And it was close to the end of the Civil War. And it was through a new constitutional amendment, which also created for the first time the lieutenant governor position. Now, it was eliminated 4 years later with the new constitution, which we live under today. Now, there was an amendment back in 1970 to recreate the lieutenant governor's position. But the Constitution of 1864 created the lieutenant governor's position, and it was there for 1 year or 4 years.
It's important to you to inform Marylanders, particularly in our community, because you don't want us to have the wrong understanding of Juneteenth.
Right, exactly. Well, and it needs to be factual, understanding your history, it needs to be factual. And I mean, I had this conversation with my sister, she was talking about, a family reunion that we're going to have, and it's going to be on Juneteenth. And I said, well, you understand Juneteenth did not free the slaves. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I said, no, it didn't free the slaves. It was based on the Emancipation Proclamation. And the Emancipation Proclamation only freed the slaves during state of rebellion. So when Texas came back into the Union, that meant that Texas slave owners could enslave people. So it didn't, it was, once the rebellion was over, the states could go back to their old wicked ways. There wasn't anything to stop them until the 13th Amendment was codified and ratified.
I don't know if you picked up my book, I Am Black Wall Street, but we talk about Florida and Texas. There's a hero, two heroes in my book. One is Captain John Brown, a white man. He was not for slavery. He fought with the Kansas Jayhawkers. Then there was also Chief John Horse, the Black Indian. Now, LG, this guy goes from Florida on the Trail of Tears. He was not a slave. He was a soldier all the way to Oklahoma because they promised him freedom. He got out there and he found that they lied to him. He then took his 200 soldiers to Nacimiento, Mexico. And in Mexico, they still celebrate Juneteenth today. He ended up coming back, but his soldiers went on to become the first Seminole Scouts. And so I wanted to share with you that although slavery is as American as apple pie, so is fighting for freedom. There were a lot of people who fought for their freedom. They never told us that the blacks on the Trail of Tears were anything but slaves. My research showed that at least 200 of them were soldiers.
Right. Well, there's, I wouldn't say too sizable, but there's a sizable African-American population in Oklahoma today. that are descendants of folks who came, very early on, and many of them were former slaves or free men that moved to Oklahoma, the new territory. Some of them were homesteaders after, it was supposed to be an Indian territory initially. And then the Homestead Act opened up a lot of the prairie land, including Oklahoma, and African Americans moved there as well. And so we were always looking for freedom and liberty.
And we got to mention, you mentioned the state of Maryland. Maryland had more free Black people than any other state in the Union. 86,000 free Blacks in the state of Maryland. Baltimore had the largest population of free Blacks prior to the Civil War.
Right.
So while there were the slavers, there was also that freedom movement, and not all Blacks were slaves.
No, not all Blacks were slaves. I mean, you go back to Benjamin Banneker, was not a slave and never was. He was a free man. Frederick Douglass's first wife was a free woman from Caroline County. So, and if you go to the Hill section of Easton in Talbot County, that is the, arguably, there's another jurisdiction that tries to fuss with them, but arguably the oldest continuously utilized neighborhood of free and freed African Americans in the country. And that's
we don't know that in Baltimore. We don't know that Eastern Shore history. Eastern Shore history is older than Baltimore history, is my understanding.
Yeah, I have a replica of a map here that's from 1794. And when you look at it, all those little towns in the Eastern Shore that we know of today, Cambridge and Easton, Newmarket, and I mean, Newmarket's over in Carroll County, but Salisbury, Princess Anne, they are all there in 1794, and largely because they were right on the bay. It was easy access. That was your transportation, as well as commerce was right there. And so, in that time and in the years after that, of course, there was a large slave population. But as economies shift, many of the slave owners would free slaves, just, some who were opposed to selling them primarily to slave traders that would take them south, they would free their slaves instead because they couldn't afford to keep them. And so they would free them in many cases. And so you had a large free population and freed population, which helped, people like Harriet Tubman when it came time that they, those who were seeking freedom, they knew because there were African Americans who were working there, free people who worked in these various areas who could tell them, this is the route that you should take. And there's a person at this location that will help you, along the way. And so if you get a chance, the Caroline County Historic Society does a really good job of explaining the Underground Railroad that came through Caroline County. And that was the path that many, including Harriet Tubman, took from, say, Dorchester County through Caroline to get to Delaware and then on to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia.
What's also fascinating, I don't know if you've ever been to Niagara Falls, but right next door to Niagara Falls is Lewiston, New York. And in that town, Harriet Tubman has property, but that's where the falls turns into Niagara River. If you cross that river, you can make it into Canada. But let me tell you, like the Mississippi, it's no chump river. It's a big river.
No. Well,
I got to ask you about the counseling compact. Can you tell us about that before you go?
Yeah, real quick. Well, what it does, during the pandemic, and a lot of things were opened up during the pandemic in terms of, allowing for telehealth services, because people were not going into the doctor's office or into their psychiatrist or their therapist or their drug treatment, inside. So it was opening up telehealth services, and even to the point where we lifted, and a number of states lifted, the licensing requirements. And only the licensing requirements meant that, typically a therapist or psychiatrist or someone doing drug treatment has to be licensed in the state where the patient is located, which is really an outdated restriction, because people go to national schools now. Psychiatrists go to national medical schools. Therapists go to national schools. So what was done during the pandemic, as long as we were in a state of emergency, an out-of-state licensee, you're licensed in Pennsylvania as a therapist or counselor in drug treatment or mental health services, that you could then provide telehealth services to somebody here, a patient in Maryland. It allowed for additional resources to come in, and particularly if you were in areas that were not necessarily in the Baltimore-Washington corridor, where we have a lot more of psychiatrists and therapists than you would, say, on the eastern shore of Maryland or in western Maryland or in the northern parts of Carroll or Baltimore County or Cecil County. And so once that was over in terms of the state of emergency, you may have lost a therapist that you had before. What we did was we passed legislation last year that allowed the state to enter into a compact with other states where there's essentially reciprocity, that if you're licensed in one of these other states, you can practice in Maryland, and vice versa. A Maryland licensed therapist or counselor can see patients in another state. And so when it first started, it was just 2 states. What's that?
That includes Maryland, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, West Virginia, Utah, Maine, Florida, Kentucky, and Nebraska.
Right. When it first started, we had to have 10 states to get it launched. And initially, there were 2 states, us and Georgia. We were the first 2 states to sign on or pass the implementing legislation. Since then, we've added those 8 additional states. There are other states. I know Delaware is considering their legislation now. I need to talk to the lieutenant governor to see where they are on that. Tennessee, I know their legislation is pending, and a couple of others it's still pending. Virginia, they didn't take it up in this last session. I've sent a letter to DC to join the compact, because I'm particularly interested in making sure that our surrounding states, are providing, or at least we have that reciprocity. Because if you're in, let's say, Prince George's or Montgomery County, you may want to see a therapist in DC, and right now that DC therapist may not be able to see you in Prince George's County because they're not licensed in the state and there's no reciprocity. And like I said, that's an outdated barrier to getting services for folks. These kind of state licensing requirements are really a barrier to access to the marketplace.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the people behind the wall. How are we coming with the transition of people behind the walls? On your watch, there's some people that have come home after 30, 40 years. A guy that I grew up with, he was locked up 42 years. He's now home on the streets.
Mm-hmm. Well, we try through the Department of Corrections to transition folks, start that transition process early. One of the things that we've been doing of late, and we started it with the juvenile services side and city schools, Baltimore City Schools, is working with the Home Builders Association, their foundation, to train people in these trades. And Secretary Green with Public Safety and Corrections is implementing that program to work. They have some vocational training in the prison system, but this is a direct link to those employers that are looking for people, to come out and can do the carpentry, the electrician work, the HVAC kind of work, to get them trained while they're still, behind bars, and then to transition. And with the home builders, because they are an association of member entities, the member entities look to the training to possibly hire some of these folks. So that's one of the programs. I know there's also Cars for Change, was just out there a couple of weeks ago, where they take folks that are coming out of the system. They start early, but when they're on work release, training them into what we used to call auto mechanics, now technicians, I guess they're called now, techs, but training them in those areas. I've spoken to the dealer associations that say, look, we don't care if the person is coming out of the criminal justice system. we need auto techs. We need those folks, and they pay a lot of money right away. Now, one of the challenges is that folks have to be willing to go where those jobs are. And there may not be as many of those jobs, let's say, right in your neighborhood. So it means you got to catch the bus and get there. And then once you raise some money, maybe you are moving closer or buying the car to get there. But it still requires that individual to put in the effort. Just like with, if you're going through drug treatment, or any kind of addiction, be it cigarettes or whatever, Coca-Cola, you have to really want it and put in that effort.
People look at you, LG, they would not think that you're from the streets of Washington, D.C. They would think that all of your friends went to Harvard.
I know one guy who went to Harvard. That's about it. Yeah. So you do what you can. You grow up, you grow up and you try to do the best for yourself and your family. And that's what I've done.
Thank you for your time, LG.
Okay. Thank you. You take care.
Yes, sir. We've been speaking with the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland. My name's Doni Glover. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for Mr. William Honolulu coming up in 15 minutes. Have a beautiful day. Good morning, world. Hope you learned something.